Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me once again. Massive thank you to all who have subscribed to the channel and who have hit the thumbs up button and who have shared the content, and also thank you to those who have the time and spend a little bit of time viewing my videos. It's greatly appreciated. Someone just the other day asked me, what are your what are your intentions, and what's the outcome in producing these videos? The answer was actually quite simple. It's just to generate conversation. Like I said in my first video, there are so many far more knowledgeable podcasters out there and people doing videos sharing some amazing knowledge, and all I'm endeavoring to do is give my humble opinion. And you say to yourself every single day that you wake up, what's the most important news item of the day? What makes you sit up and take notice? And it was only the other day, not that it hasn't created a little bit of apprehension on my behalf, but this discussion around the misinformation and disinformation bill. We spoke about Sydney Water, and we spoke about the issues with the World Health Organization and their discussion around monkeypox, which sort of seems to have disappeared into the background. But this whole discussion of misinformation and disinformation, I was only looking at it the other day, and it's very, very concerning, to say the least. It's titled the Communication Legislation Amendment Combating Misinformation and Disinformation Bill 2024. So, it's again readily available for everyone. So they're discussing it in Canberra without too much public consultation, mind you, which is always not a very good sign. And you say to yourself, why does government do that? Why do they pass and why do they discuss certain bills and don't allow the public the opportunity to express their views? Well, it's probably because, this government of ours isn't really exercising democratic responsibility. This disinformation and misinformation bill, it basically enables the government to censor political opponents and to censor you and I. As an example, during the craziness of 2020, 2021 and 2022, and the coercion and the control during the public health orders, there were people on social media who were circulating information, and they were discussing about alternative medicines. Now, if the World Health Organization decides to come again, and those same individuals, and I dare say there would be more now, who would decide to try to inform the public by circulating alternative information, they won't be allowed to do that anymore. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. You're going to get censored, and more than likely you're going to get a tap on the door or an email, and you're going to find yourself in some trouble if you decide to discuss and have an opinion on climate. Same thing. Or gender identity. Same thing. It's any criticism or even an observation can land you in hot water. This is interesting. It says here, if you question, the government's narrative and as an example as far as health is concerned, and you discuss something concerning a different alternative medicine, you could be found guilty under harm to the efficacy of preventative health measures in Australia. If you decide to discuss other interventions, medical interventions, you could be guilty of harm to public health. And these are all clause 14.1b. If you decide to talk about against net zero, you can be hit under clause 14.1 and be found guilty for causing harm under imminent harm to the Australian economy. So you can go off and post and say, don't leave your money in the bank. You can be found guilty of saying some stuff like that, or buy gold, or anything to do or against the government. You can find yourself in hot water, and that falls under 14.1f. You could be censored if you decide to talk up against the big banks. Harm to public confidence in the banking system. And these are all clauses under the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. It's very lengthy piece of writing, and a lot of people aren't going to sit there and read it. A lot of people get lost in a lot of language. Yours truly is one of them. And there are all these clauses and hidden language that is purposely put in there to deceive individuals. For an example, if you say accuse the Australian Electoral Commission of corruption in their voting system, you can be found guilty under 14.1a, harm the integrity of a Commonwealth electoral process. So you just want to give your opinion. Can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore. And that's dangerous. I was contemplating on just cherry picking bits of a speech by an individual only the other day. And this individual's name is Russell Broadbent. But please bear with me, because his words ring very true. This is his full speech. This is this politician who is speaking out against this draconian misinformation and disinformation bill. Now, yes, it is the current Labor Party who are bringing it in, and they're more than likely going to give these extraordinary powers to the E-Safety Commissioner, who then can decide what's allowed and what's not allowed. I find that very dangerous in the hands of one individual. But this is his full speech. Today is a dark day, and one that does not bode well for the nation. The government's so-called Combating Misinformation Bill marks the beginning for the end of free speech and democracy in Australia. Make no mistake, this bill is another alarming example of overreach and a step towards government tyranny over what we can and cannot discuss. Basically what it really boils down to. It gives the government unfettered power of control over Australians and their right to exchange ideas, thoughts and opinions. Do you realise what we're risking here? Free speech is the bedrock of democracy, and as Benjamin Franklin said, there is no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. The bill compels digital platform providers like X and Facebook to censor content that may contribute to serious harm. And it was only the other day, I believe Elon Musk called it fascism, the way Australia is behaving. Well, I tend to agree. But who makes that decision? Who's the arbiter of truth? One of the bill's definitions of content that may cause serious harm is content that may cause serious harm to public health in Australia, including the efficacy of preventative health measures. Where have I heard these words before? Why don't they just say misinformation is whatever discussion or debate goes against the narrative of the government of the day? It appears that anyone with a view that's contrary to the government's narrative is going to be in the firing line. Just like during the pandemic, when our government, the government I was a part of, censored 4,000 social media posts as misinformation, many of which proved to be absolutely true. And you can go search that up yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm not alone in my concerns. In giving feedback on the original exposure draft, the Law Council rightly outlined concerns that digital platform services lack the expertise and resources to identify and distinguish misinformation. The Human Rights Commission, who were missing in action during the pandemic, and yes, yours truly also went to the Human Rights Commission, as many others did, said the bill didn't strike the right balance between censorship or objectively untrue content and protection of freedom of expression. It seems this final bill hasn't adequately addressed either of these legitimate issues. So why is it being rushed through? I agree with Dr. Philip Altman, a pharmacologist with 40 years experience as a clinical trial and drug regulatory affairs consultant, who believes the biggest peddlers of misinformation during the pandemic were the government and unelected health bureaucrats. I think many of us would agree on that. That's because they falsely claimed that the experimental gene-based mRNA injections were safe and effective when this was not supported by the available evidence, even from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. Falsely claimed the senseless vaccine mandates would help to stop transmission when they were never tested for that. Falsely claimed that the COVID injections would keep you from getting COVID, getting seriously ill, or going to hospital. Falsely claimed that masks prevented transmission or infection. Falsely claimed it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Falsely claimed that early treatments were unsuitable, and falsely claimed that there was no clinical evidence to support ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of COVID. Worst of all was the vilification and censorship of doctors, academics and scientists who raised the alarm about the safety of the vaccines. But here's the rub. Professional news services, mainstream media, are excluded from this bill. Did you get that, ladies and gentlemen? Mainstream media are excluded from the misinformation and disinformation bill. So they can lie or cause harm without fear or repercussions. Does anyone see a big red flag here? Based on what I've observed over the last 5 years, and this is Russell Broadbent speaking, it's the deliberate suppression of information by the media that is most sinister. And I think I'd mentioned this earlier. It's all about censorship, keeping the truth away from people. This includes their failure to disclose the vested interests of so-called health experts, expert committees and institutions providing public advice, their failure to report on the doctors and health practitioners being deregistered and suspended for daring to disagree with the government's narrative, their failure to put pressure on the government to reveal the contractual arrangements with vaccine manufacturers, their failure to ask about the estimated 30,000 excess deaths since the rollout of the jabs, their failure to hold the TGA accountable for failing to investigate the more than 140,000 reports of adverse reactions to the jabs. That 140,000 could be higher. Their failure to highlight the minimal to net zero risk of COVID in the young versus the risk to the elderly. And most heinously, their failure to cover stories of the vaccine injured, including the thousands of injured Australians who aren't even eligible for compensation because of the illogically narrow eligibility criteria. We're constantly assured that the science is settled and bombarded with propaganda to follow the science, but surely this dogma has no place in science. Surely our doctors, academics and scientists must be free to ask questions about assertions and debate issues. These are truly unprecedented times. In my 25 years in the Parliament, I've never seen legislation like it. That's the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. This is not the country I grew up in, and it's heading in a direction that makes me fear for future generations. Today I urge Australians to stand up and speak out on this bill while they still can. Now, thank you very much for allowing me to read that. Yes, it was long, but it outlined quite clearly, explicitly, that during those handful of years, there was a lot of censorship. And a lot of the stuff that should have been out there for the public wasn't allowed. So if this bill goes through, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, in future, if you or I have a difference of opinion, if we decide to speak out about anything, not in a mean or controversial matter, just give an opinion, we could be in serious trouble because of this particular piece of legislation. That's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. I was going to leave you with something else concerning the misinformation bill, but it's there for everyone. You can go out and find this information. If they decide, ladies and gentlemen, to push this through, then our younger generation, those currently in school, and all the families out there with their young children, as they grow up, their liberties, the whole idea of freedom of speech, there's going to be none of that. It'll be, I tell you what to do, I tell you what to say. And that's not the country that I grew up in. It's changing before our very eyes. We've got to stand up. We've got to voice our disapproval. And with the council elections just completed, I urge every single person in any of the councils that you live in, find out what their scheduled meetings are and attend. Listen to what they have to say. Get yourself heard. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, be good, do good. God bless.